live on April 22nd, 2020. It's the Dev Talk Show with my co-hosts, Rich Ross and Andy Schwam. And we're super excited tonight because as you can see on your screen, whether you're watching us on Mixer, Twitch, or YouTube, you can see that we have a special guest with us tonight. And I think that's super exciting for the three of us because it means that we're not limited to the things that we know, which we've already finished with. We've taught you everything we know. We're done. Next week it's GW Basic, and we're just going to keep going.
That's never stopped us from talking. Once we've passed everything we know.
Oh no, that's true. Not every show is anything we know anyway, right? But thank you for joining us tonight. So we have our special guest tonight, Stachu Korick. Thank you for joining us.
Sure, thanks for having me.
So if you don't know, if you haven't seen him at Philly.net or Philly Code Camp, Stachu has been talking about functional programming, FSharp, and other topics, but also is the host of the WTF Sharpcast, right? Did I get that right?
Best name ever.
WTF Sharp, yep.
WTF Sharp, which is it's a great podcast about functional programming in FSharp. And, you know, a lot of us in the .NET world, we kind of know there's this, some of us kind of know that there's this other language out there. So I think where I kind of want to start with this is let's talk about this. What is this other language, FSharp? And it's part of .NET, right?
Yep. Yeah. FSharp is just another language that compiles .il. So it can interoperate with C# and Visual Basic, same way that those two can interoperate with each other.
Okay, awesome.
And it's just basically a language with a slightly functional spin, and we'll kind of get into what functional means, but
yeah,
it just has a little bit different of a style.
Awesome. So now, if I'm a developer that maybe I installed Visual Studio, or maybe I didn't install Visual Studio, is FSharp included? How do I get it?
Yeah, FSharp's been included in Visual Studio since I think 2012, somewhere around there. But if I'm in Visual Studio 2019 right now, and if I go to create new project, and if I change the language option to FSharp, you can see that baked in everything.
There we go.
Yep, we're up.
Yep. Oh, sorry about that.
No,
baked in everything. Baked in everything right here. If I change the language to FSharp, I have project templates built in for me. So if I want to create a console app or a .NET Core web application, I can do that right from Visual Studio. So if you're normal .NET dev who's on Windows and Visual Studio, you're already set up.
Right, which plenty of devs are.
Yep.
Do you happen to know if I was maybe just installing the SDK without Visual Studio, maybe I'm on Linux, or maybe I'm going to just use VS Code? Is it a separate download, or do I just get FSharp with the SDK?
You get FSharp with the SDK, as far as I know. You also, so you can absolutely do it on Linux. So this is a rare occurrence, me being on Windows right now. I work from Ubuntu 99% of the time, and I use a different IDE called Rider. It's by JetBrains, the same people that make the what's that tool for visual? Yeah, ReSharper. Yeah. So it's basically a whole IDE based by those same people that make ReSharper. So if you're on Linux or Mac, you can use that.
Let me throw this out, Stachu. We should have you come back. I've always wanted to see like a really good have a show about like something like a Rider show. You know, I mean it's .NET. It's just not using Visual Studio, right? But it's still .NET and still the whole ecosystem. And I think it would be an interesting show. Maybe we could talk about that sometime.
Yeah, Rider is a great product. I'm on it full time. I used to use VS Code, so you can use FSharp on VS Code, along with all the other languages you can use on VS Code. But I recently switched over to Rider for most of the projects that I do.
All right, cool. So, hey, first, before we get moving, I want to just thank everybody that's joining us on the stream tonight, whether you're on Mixer, Twitch, or YouTube. And make sure that if you're enjoying what you're seeing, that you hit that follow button, or maybe you can join us in the chat and ask questions, and we'll be sure that all of us see them and pass them along, and we talk about what you're saying. If you're watching us in the future on YouTube, and you hit that subscribe button, you'll get notifications when we're on the air. And if you've got anything to say about tonight's show or just want to tell us you enjoyed it, head down to the comment section or hit that like button. And that's just about everything we need to know about what we can do, right? So let's go ahead. I'm going to back off and let's talk about FSharp and how do we want to get started? Let's go ahead and let you take that away here.
Sure, it sounds good. So in addition to those three IDEs that I mentioned, there's also one other option, and that is the Fable REPL. If you go right now in your browser to fable.io/REPL and you have any sort of modern browser, you can try FSharp very quickly. You basically have an IDE built into your browser. Or if you go down here to samples, you can see, if you go down a tour of FSharp, you can start to learn FSharp. If you go through these sections one by one, so if I want to learn about functions in FSharp, I can load up all this code, compile it within my browser itself, and see the results down here within this little console. So you don't have to download anything. If you just got a fresh computer installed on a browser, you're already good to go.
That's
cool.
It's very responsive.
.io.
Yep. And this is something I'll talk about later. This is actually something that compiles FSharp source code down to JavaScript. So this code here is being compiled down to JavaScript and being run, and this console is being shown. But we'll get to that later. Point being, if you want to just
put a link in,
play with
so it's
FSharp,
fable.io/. Do I need the /REPL? I'm going to put a link in the.
I don't know if you need that /, but.
Yeah, but I'm going to say /REPL. Okay.
Yep.
So there it is in the chat if anybody wants to do it. And
that's cool.
And
it's
go.
like JS Fiddle, CodePen for
exactly.
FSharp.
Just like one of those. And here's basically the simplest program you can make. Printfn, this is basically like system.console. And I can just say, so printf basically means print format. Hello, dev talk show, and down here you can see the console output, and that's actually being compiled to JavaScript and then run here. Yeah, so really IDE baked into your browser, and it's very fast. So, in my experience, has been faster than JS Fiddle or any of those, which has been
a great teaching tool. Right?
Yeah, it's a fantastic teaching tool if you want to, especially for situations like I've been where you're trying to teach other people FSharp. Yep.
So there's historically, and it's been almost 10 years at least, been 3 languages for .NET that Microsoft has produced: VB, C#, and FSharp.
What was the first one? What?
VB, which is still around, and in fact will be in .NET. Will be in .NET 5.
That's right, we did, Rich.
Blog post is out there about its role in .NET 5. That said, I think for over 20 years now, you look at VB, you look at C#, very similar languages, similar paradigms. But then I think what a lot of developers take their first look at FSharp, and it's stepping into a different world. So I guess where I'm interested in starting is what should the developer maybe unlearn or forget about? You're still in .NET, so you're still home safe, but this is different, and there's a reason for that.
Yeah, I think the first thing for me to realize is to not focus on what to forget, is to focus on what things do you love about C# that you kind of want more of. I remember when I first got into FSharp, I was working at a job where I was bored. You know, one of those jobs where you have tasks assigned to you for a while, and then suddenly the tasks stop coming in. You go on the internet and you learn a programming language out. That's how I spend my time anyway. And so I go onto the web, and I look for just .NET resources, and I see this FSharp thing, and the thing that attracted me most about it is, at the time in C# I was learning all about LINQ, and I love LINQ. The fact that you could very quickly express your thoughts in kind of a linear way, just representing how you're thinking, was a very nice feel to me, and I wanted more of that. And what FSharp allowed me to do was to basically have that same feeling of taking what you have in your brain, the pseudocode, and basically allowing that throughout the whole program. So that's kind of what I want to do when I take you guys into this language, is focus on that pseudocode-driven development and show you kind of how I write an FSharp program and why I reached for it when I was doing C# dev. And at this point, I still do write a tiny bit of C# at work, but it's by and large FSharp, and I'm really glad to have made that transition. So does that seem like a reasonable way to kind of approach this?
I'm excited.
Yeah. Cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to utilize this resource called the FSharp Cohens. Cohens are basically like katas, or little tasks to kind of get you to learn a language. At least that's the way I understand it. And one of the Cohen in here is working with a little bit of data around stock data. So the prompt is, you have some stock data. So this is let stock data equals, and let's digest this kind of block by block here. First off, let. That's basically var in C#, although it has a slightly different usage because we also use it to define functions. But right here, we were defining a value, which is a string list. You can see here, just like in C#, we have some IntelliSense. We have some kind of hints here that show us what types we're working with. And we have basically how you would get it in a CSV file. We have some CSV data that we've basically taken into this list. And the prompt here is to look at this data and say, okay, so below is a list containing comma-separated data about Microsoft stock prices during March of 2012. Without modifying the list, and this is an important phrase we'll talk about today, programmatically find the day with the greatest variance between the opening and the closing price. Okay, so this is the biggest point. Programmatically find the day. So you see here we have a number of different columns. We have date, open, high, low, close, volume, and adjusted close. Find the day with the greatest variance between opening and closing price. So when I see a problem like this, or I'm faced like something like this, when I'm in C#, I naturally reach to link like something like this. I'm imagining either from SQL or CSV or something like that, I have a bag of data. Doesn't really matter what kind of bag that is, whether it's a list or an array or something like that. Point is, it's some kind of collection of these string things or whatever record I'm looking at. And I want to do certain things to it. One of the first things I kind of reach to is, well, there's a lot of data here that I don't really care about. I want to first filter out and only look at the data that I care about, right? I want to take the scope that's given to me, whatever's in my database, and I don't want to select star, I want to select 2 columns. So I want to focus on that. So what you guys, when you see this prompt and you see this data, where does your mind reach to if you were in C# right now?
Well, I mean, I'm thinking like you were saying, like a link query, something like that says, with like a max or something like that, right? Like where, something like that, I guess, right?
Yeah,
Without
for sure,
thinking about too much. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I think, as soon as I go through here is, I want the result, the actual date here to be in this field at the end, and my job is to really fill in how do I get a legitimate date here. I think I want to do something like this. I want to take this data, so I want to take this stock data, and I want to do certain things to it. First thing off, this first row here is basically garbage for our context, right? It's not real data, so we want to skip it. So we can say skip header row. That's something we want to do to it. And I'll talk about what this operator here is. This is something special in FSharp. But when I'm kind of writing code in FSharp, what I do is I take the data and I just keep on applying thoughts to it. So I want to skip that header row. I want to project to some type, right? So I want to project to some type that only has the pieces of data that I care about. I want to order by difference descending. So you mentioned looking at the open and the close, and maybe doing some order by descending, something like that. So I want to order by difference descending. I want to take the head or the first element of that, so basically dot first in link, and I want to get the date from that record.
That really reads the way the way you said that. You thought through it in that process, and you wrote just that.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's the feeling I always had when I started to work with LINQ and kind of moved away from for loops and for each loops within C#, is I got a taste of this. I got a taste of kind of what SQL gives to, kind of what LINQ gives to, where you can express your thoughts in somewhat of a linear fashion. In SQL's case, we're talking about Postgres, where you have comment table expressions.
Mm-hmm.
But in any case, so this is how my brain naturally thinks about programming. And I got a taste of this with LINQ. but I didn't quite get enough. So I'm going to try to illustrate to you how an F# programmer goes from just these thoughts of here's what I want to do with this data, and without editing this code, I can get this to compile as is, and get the right result here. So I'm going to basically have to define a number of functions here. I'm going to have to define some function that skips the header row, define a function that projects to some fancy type, and I'll define what that type is now, and I'll kind of go through what the difference between C# types and F# types are. We want to order by difference descending. It's going to be very similar to link. We want to take that first element. In fact, I'll even name this take the first element so I don't use any F# lingo in here. And I want to get the date from that record. So first things first, we want to skip some header row. So we have this data, and I want to skip this. I want to only look at this data. In F#, we can basically define that very quickly. So we can do let skip header row equals seek.skip1. All right, so we're doing something a little bit different here. So function calls, right? So I haven't written down any parentheses yet. So some of you guys might be a little bit nervous, but but the point is we don't need parentheses to call our functions here. And we have a function. So this is a module level function, basically a static member within a C# equivalent. And what this does is it takes some count. You can see here in the IntelliSense, it has count of int, and it takes us from one sequence to another. So a sequence in F# is it's an IEnumerable. It literally is an IEnumerable under the hood. And what I'm doing is I'm skipping one element. And I'm going to brush over some of the pieces here. But the point is I can define functions very easily.
Now, there's no semicolon there. We're freaking out now. I mean, there's no semicolon, right?
There's no semicolon. So yeah, F# is kind of a combination of C# and how it was at the time of F#, and very influenced by OCaml or ML, which were languages back decades ago. OCaml and F# are effectively the same language, or at least they were at the point of F#'s inception. And in any ML-based language, you don't really have many semicolons or parentheses. We do still have semicolons, so if you're creating certain kinds of data, we have them, but we haven't written any yet. You can save your pinkies. All right. So the next thing we want to do here is we want to project to some type. But before we do that, we should define what that type looks like. So in C#, you would naturally probably reach for a class here. In F#, there's a number of different types. The kind of most basic one, or the most common one that I utilize, is this thing called a record, and we're actually getting records. Actually, are records already in C#?
Coming, I think.
They're coming. They're coming in the next version.
For 9.
Great.
Yeah.
You guys should be very excited for that, because records are a nice way to get some stuff done.
Yeah, it looks cool.
Yeah, they're really nice and just succinct way to get some stuff done. But the point is, very succinctly, I can define what the data is that I care about here. So I know I have a date, which in this case is a string. I'm not going to worry about date times for this purpose. Yeah. I have some close, which is some float. That's basically a double here. You can see that is an alias for system.double. And we have open. This is all of the data that I really care about. And under the hood, the IO that this is compiling to, I believe that this is basically a property with getters and setters, the auto getter setters. But very quickly, I can define that this is the data that I care about. And I can format this, 1 line or 2 lines. Here's a semicolon if you want it.
I was wondering if it was the carriage return or whatever is counting as the separator or something like that, right?
Yeah, the carriage return is what's important here. And F# is that's actually a fantastic point. F# is very, I wouldn't say very, it's much more white space specific. So if I were to do something like this, FSharp compiler is going to complain to me, and it's going to tell me, no, these fields here, this capital D, capital C, and capital O need to be aligned.
On the same line. YAML.
I don't want to compare it to YAML, but sure.
It's not
Please
YAML.
don't do that. Yes.
It's also not C language. We're like in our C languages, white space is totally meaningless. You can have it, you can take it or leave it.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So really quickly. Yep.
Just
you
a
saw
quick question.
something?
So you have a type there, and the type has 3 different data types, I guess.
Fields.
Yep. But if you look at what's in that data row, there's a lot more than just 3. We've got 1, 2, 3, 5 different numeric sets of values. I mean, just looking at where things are separated by comma.
Yeah, we're gonna basically, the next step here is to project to some fancy types. So we're gonna write a function that ignores the other columns here and just focuses on projecting to this. I don't need a data type representing all of these fields for my needs.
Gotcha.
This is all I need to solve the problem. So I'm just kind of defining this type, and then the next step we'll do is we'll fill in a function that'll project to that. So let project to some type, and this will take in a row. So it's right here, I'm defining a function which takes in one parameter called row. We're not telling it what type it is right now. We're just saying it's a row. We know that's a string because this is a string and we're looking at the actual data, but we have a row. And project to, let's say rows. And what we want to do for each of these rows is we want to seek.map. So much like map within C#'s link, what we can do is we can do seek.map. And I'm going to fill in some functions here, so don't worry if you lose something. But we want to split commas, so we want to basically rip this row apart into its constituent comma-separated values, and we want to then take each of those. Here, let me break this down a little bit. I want to do some copy paste, and then I'll talk some more. All right. Don't worry about the man behind the curtains. All right. So I'm basically backfilling some functions, so we don't have to go through everything here. But what I'm doing is I'm defining a number of functions at once. So let's kind of break this down here. We have a function that splits commas. So it basically takes one of these rows and it takes a string and it returns multiple strings. This is using your normal string split method in C#. This is what an array looks like, by the way. It's this ugly looking thing with these weird handlebars. And this is as opposed to a list type in FSharp. And so we define this function here. We take one string. We basically yield many strings. We can see string to string list. And also as a helper functions, I want to define that to parse a double, I can input a string and to parse double. And the whole point of this project to some type is to take some rows, some string list. And if I want to, I can come in here. I can say string sequence or string list. Could do it either way. And I want to split each of those rows by commas. So here I'm basically taking here. In fact, let's break this down a little bit more. Let's look at this and run it within interactive window. So I don't have to tell you how things work. You can just see it. Interactive window. Yeah, so if I highlight this code here, and if I hit Alt-Enter in JetBrains Writer, I forget what the key combo is within
it might be the same.
VS Code. It's probably the same.
Yeah.
And if I run that, it was sent down here to FSharp Interactive, and that stock data is now in context. So if I want to do stock data, and I wanted to show it off, that's what stock data looks like. If I want to do stock data and just look at the first element, that's what it looks like. So I can kind of play with that here. And I know this is a little bit weird here too. we have this dot before the indexer.
Well,
but anyway,
there'll be semicolons. You went from no semicolons to 2 semicolons. I mean, blowing my mind.
When we're in the interactive window, that's when the double semicolons come up. They're not something that's used in the normal programming. But when we have that data defined, I can also use that command to define the skip header row function, and also the skip header row has been inferred of generic, blah, blah, blah. Oh, okay, I see. It's going to, so it's thinking here that it's because I'm not giving it the full context, it got a little bit confused, but that's okay. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to run all of this. Oh, cool. So here's the part of the demo where things are not doing as we intended to.
Does it need a parameter?
It really does. What need a parameter? The skip header row? Yeah, we can give it a parameter.
If you weren't looking for that, then don't do it. So
there was actually a question in the chat earlier.
Yep.
About your choice of why this was from Subsoil Dwarf, said, why not let skip header row equal seek tail? I don't know if that would help you at all or something like that, but
that actually would work very well. I'm curious. That must be an FSharper.
I'm thinking so.
That knows that secretly.
Right. And then tail it doesn't represent what a lot of C# developers might believe. And tell me if I'm wrong here. It doesn't represent the last element, right?
No, it represents all but the first element.
Right.
Really?
Yep.
Oh, that does seem like a good idea. Subsoil Dwarf says, who, me? Yeah.
And just from the little bit of work I've done, is at first that seems odd that you would have a head, you would have a way to get the first element head, and then tail wouldn't be the last element, it would be everything else. And at first that seems odd, but then what it turns out is that provides an awesome way to do things recursively, because you just keep passing the tail in, grab the head, pass the tail on to the recursive call, grab the head, pass the tail onto the recursive call, and eventually you've toured the whole thing.
Yep. The list here that we're looking at, this is not your normal basically mutable array. So the array list that's built into C#, or not the array list, but the default list with the generic list in C#, that is not this. This is a singly linked list where basically you just have pointers. You have a node and a pointer to the next node, and that node is a pointer to the next node, and that's it. So it's basically, like someone says, it's a Lisp list, and all each element knows is its next part. And so that seek tail is basically saying the first node, just ask for its target, and that's the list we're going to return. That's basically what seek tail would do under the hood. But they're absolutely correct. We can do the skip header row. In any case,
it doesn't solve the problem.
It doesn't solve the problem, knowing, but that's okay. That's okay. We can ignore that and just work past it. The point I was trying to get to here is that if we fill in code, and I'm going to skip ahead for time's sake, is I'm going to fill in the extra functions here. And those are how we order by the difference descending, how we take the first element, and getting the date from the record. Something got interesting here. Okay. I renamed it from the last time I was here. Yeah. So here's what all of the code would look like. We have the stock data. We have something that skips the header row. We define a type, which is just the data that we really care about. We have some helper functions here that help us kind of project to this type, which involves some doubling, some parsing here of doubles. And we define a function to order by difference descending. So very similar to your order by or an order by descending in C#, we have sort by in F#. And we basically say fun. So fun is a keyword in F#. That's how you know it's a fun language. And here we can take a row, and we can basically say, I want to get the difference between the close and the open. I want to take its absolute value, and I want to basically order by descending. So here I'm going to kind of multiply that by -1. There are other ways of doing this, of course, but I find that this is a nice natural approach of saying this, and then this, and then this. And we'll get to what this operator does. I know you might have already guessed what it does. We'll get there in a second. But the next thing we do is we want to take the first element. So we're using that seek.head function here, and then get the date from that record. Is we take the row, or given a row, we return its date. And if we run this program here, so I'm gonna actually copy that here to a program.fs and then run it. So it's, just like your normal C# applications here, they all succeed on the first try, right? So it's very easily, the point is, if I start with this kind of pseudocode, I can use that to drive the actual underlying code. The implementation doesn't matter, right? What matters is getting a right answer and having other developers being able to come in very quickly, seeing what you've done and seeing where they need to make changes, right? Because most code is read a lot more than it's written. And that's what I love about FSharp. That's why I've kind of switched over to it. So I kind of went over a lot. I know I brushed past some things. The number one thing I want to jump back to is this operator right here. And this is something that is actually being talked about for JavaScript. I think it's coming to JavaScript before too long, or maybe it's coming to TypeScript first. I forget the story there. But basically what this does is if I have a function, in fact, I'm going to jump to this scratch pad here. But if I have a function, say, let increment x equals x plus 1. So you can imagine what this does. Or if I send this to interactive, and then I do increment 2, and if I can type, then it takes that value and it applies 1. So I'm basically, this is one way of calling the function. I can call it in the normal way. But the other way I can do it is I can say from 2, I want to call implement or increment. And what that's basically doing is passing the value to the left of the pipe as the rightmost parameter or argument of this function. So if I had something that was let add a b equals a plus b, in fact, I'll just do that down here. And then I said add, if I say to pipe add 3, this is another way to get that same function done. So it's just a matter of kind of reordering parameters. And the reason we do that is so we can do things like this. And so this is kind of a weird example here because these are all functions with basically one parameter. But let's say we wanted to grab not only the first element, but the 5 elements of most difference descending, right? So we want to find the 5 dates that the 5 dates there. So what we can do is instead of seek.head, let's change the prompt a little bit. And let's say I want to take the first elements like this. I want to say, instead of just grabbing the first element, what I want to do is I want to grab the top 5. So what I'm going to do is, given rows, given that data, and given n, the number of elements I want to return, I want to take n of them. All right, so let's say that's our situation here. And let's just print that out for fun. And then here I'll actually take the first elements, and I want to take 5 elements in this case. Now, what does this not like? Oh, did I do that backwards here? Okay. Okay, so what we have here is a slightly modified program where we just have a function here that takes more than one argument, just to show what this looks like here. That's this pipe operator. Cool. Any questions from the chat here?
I feel like we had a few comments, right? Like, you know, and then some folks helping out along, but like, you know, the fact that you were showing both head and tail from Seek, I think that's probably meaning to say that it goes well if pattern matching. There is a question of, do you end up writing a lot of recursion?
I think so. I think especially if you're trying to, in most cases in F#, you don't want to mutate values. So in no place here did I change anything, right? There's no variable that I'm mutating to try to get to the eventual answer. So the only other way to work with a list, especially with this kind of list, is to recurse, or to loop incessantly. But recursion does happen a lot in F#.
Yeah.
So it becomes like less scary over time, but yes.
That that concept of not mutating values, that's like a core tenet of functional programming, right?
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's like anything, you can choose the style that you want. I've seen C# programs in many different styles, and just like that, in F# code, you'll see people that basically treat it as a different C#, and they'll use object-oriented principles, all the way to purists who will never mutate a variable and will not try to allocate anything on the stack and will be very pure in whatever way they can, right? So I think style is, you can kind of look at a generic F# style, but I think most people along that spectrum would not try to mutate.
And so do you have an opinion on that? Like, you would not mutate? Is that what you're saying?
It's a very rare case that I would mutate, and if I do mutate, it would be within a smaller scope. So in cases especially of optimization, where you're trying to optimize your performance, it might be really advantageous to mutate, to have a variable in a small scope that you mutate. For example, if you have a cache, so for example, I work on microservices that often reach out to each other in F#. So we have some microservices in F#, some in Node, and I might have some data that I need from this external source, and if it only updates if it very rarely updates, it's going to be silly to not have some variable or some cache that is mutated and kind of kept in my store at all times. So mutation is good for certain circumstances, especially when it comes to optimization. But otherwise, it's you can, as you exercise the muscle of recursion and not mutation, you get better and better at it.
So I loved how the way you began was by essentially writing what some developers might write in comments. Here's what I want to do, but it read naturally, and you know, and this is the thing that a lot of developers might instinctively say, oh gosh, I could do something like this in my language. Let's just say C#. But there's so much distraction that's gone because parentheses are gone. Deciding up front what the parameters have to be and their types is gone. The semicolons are gone. But that is a key there, is having to know up front what the parameters of these things are. You didn't really care. You just said, well, I know I'm going to skip a header row.
Yep.
And then I know I'm going to project, which if you're familiar with LINQ, you could use select to do that. And I want to be very careful, because the one thing I very much dislike doing is immediately trying to translate this to C# isms, right?
It's understandable.
But however, what I found is that as I became more, and I feel like the journey that you described was similar, as I came to like LINQ method syntax more and more, where you're both combining the fluent interface of an INumerable feeding into an INumerable feeding an INumerable, I said, boy, I really kind of like this approach. And then you go take a look at something like an F# and you say, whoa, this is that all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, and it works out like that way in normal day-to-day code now too. So I write F# professionally by day, and it very majority of the time, the code works out to be something near this, where you have, okay, I have this data from these few different sources, and I work in groceries. So let's say we have some order, we have some existing order, and I'm basically pseudocoding here, but that's kind of how it is. right? So I have some existing order, right? I've pulled it from some external source. If I want to, let's say in a unit test, just look at what that order does or what it looks like if I apply some certain events, I can very easily in my unit test say existing order dot do this and do that and do that, and I can apply our normal business logic in a very sequenced way, just as a customer would edit their cart. And I can build up their cart very organically, and then check the results and see how it would perform against certain circumstances. But the point is, it's very natural to kind of write pseudocode and have that be the final code, which as a PR reviewer and as a person who comes into the code later is a blessing.
Yeah, there's a comment from Josh M, who says, my lazy way of explaining FSharp and Elm, I guess, in addition, right, to C# devs is link all the things. Link, LINQ, of course.
Yep.
Link all the things. And yeah, that's sort of what it seems like. I echo what Chris said. I mean, I've always liked that fluent interface type of design that I guess we would say that in C#, but in F#, it just is that. Maybe.
Yeah. The other thing that I think maybe we should point out, if maybe folks who are, we definitely have a lot of F# fans in the chat tonight, and I'm really glad that you're here. That's awesome. But if you're watching this in the future on YouTube or something, and you've come across us because you say, hey, what is F#? Is even though you didn't spend a lot of time explicitly declaring types, which you used to have to do in C#, this is a statically typed language. Yep. It's not dynamic. There's no guess, or it can't change from one run to the next what this type is going to be. It's not going to be coerced. And IntelliSense even comes and helps you out and says, hey, I figured out that this had to be a string.
Yep. Yeah, you can. So you mentioned that I was not very explicit about the types in most of these situations. You can see in rare circumstance I'm explicit. Like I said before, you can treat F# as in my opinion, better C#. So for example, if I want like a row class that feels like C# and that has a default constructor of having some like date, string, close, float, and open float, and I want that to return some certain values. Maybe not open, because open's a keyword in F#. But I can basically have this look like a class.
Yeah.
It's a little bit different syntax, and we literally have class and end. But if you want to declare members within an F# program, you can do that. So if I have, but the point is, I don't want to get too deep into how to make classes in F#.
Yeah.
But the point is, if you want to, you can treat F# as C#, and you can gradually reduce those use features to kind of get closer to getting comfortable with not having to declare types.
Right. F# needs that support because it is a .NET language. It's leaving nothing out of .NET. So it needs that. And I've seen some folks maybe introducing, just for example, like an ASP.NET MVC, is they say, well, because MVC is expecting some state to be mutated, I got to use a little bit of F# isms to let me make this mutable and so on. So you need that interop. Maybe when you're starting out, though, it's not what to focus on. It's not focusing on how to use F# to be object-oriented again. It's how to use F# to be functional.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's about play. I think initially you're probably not going to take F# on your first day and write production code, right? It's probably not going to be safe. Your boss is not going to be very happy. But the good place to start is to play. Treat it as a different play space. I'm going to go through a number of different resources here as we're kind of ending the hour, and show you that what are really great places to start off here. But one of the things I started off with was this F# REPL, or this Fable REPL. I think this is probably the best place to start if you want to just dive into code, is to just look right here at these basic functions and kind of read through this and figure out, okay, what is this? is this a function? Can I define a function in one line of code? Is that possible? And then you can basically play with that and then just extract function by function and look at that.
Can I ask, when you were doing stuff earlier,
yeah,
my, you know, I have a hard time starting at the beginning with a language, and I'm already starting to look at like, well, what happens when it gets complicated, right? And I know that's what you're saying. You start at the beginning and do some of these simple things. But I was immediately wondering about things like organizing, you know, the structures of the code. And, you know, in the C# world, I have classes and methods, and we use dependency injection and, you know, all this kind of stuff. But then actually, interestingly, right when you went into this, I saw the word module.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking, all right, so is that like an organizing construct there, you know?
Yeah, this is an organizing construct. So just like in C# and VB, we also have namespaces. So it's like you know, this is secretly in some kind of namespace. In fact, this here is a module named functions in the Tor namespace. I could do something like this, where I did namespace, Tor, and then module functions, right? So this would normally be legal if I then indented this. But so here, so yeah, modules are one way to do things. And most of the FSharp code that's built in is based on modules, at least as far as I'm aware. And in modules, the way I like to think of them are they're kind of like namespaces where you're only allowed to do certain things. So or where things are broken down a little bit more. So we have modules, we have namespaces, we have classes. So you can write your normal C# classes, your normal C# interfaces, events, all those kinds of things. You can do those things in FSharp. But in terms of structure, we can't get into a full structure class right now. But modules are kind of the basic building blocks of how you do that. If anyone is interested in structure, this is probably the best book, in my opinion, on structuring FSharp code, specifically on .NET and .NET Core. And it goes through a lot of kind of lessons learned in terms of how to structure your code. And that's based on a lot of experience with other similar languages.
So just as we're paused there's a question from Adequate Odin 6. How can you refer functions in different file to current usage file?
Okay, so let's do this. So I'm going to create a program here.
Look at that. We ask a question and Stachu just says, yeah, I'll handle that.
Yeah, we can do that.
Seriously, appreciate the flexibility there, because you know you had certain things you want to talk about, but appreciate that you're just able to just on the fly go for it, you know.
He's got his own FSharp file. So adequate.
Famous. Woo!
So if we define a function here, let's just define that quick. Add a b equals a plus b. And if we want to use that from program.fs, in fact, yeah, so we have a module here. It's called adequate Odin 6. It's within our namespace console app 1, and we want to use add. So let's say we have add a b, and I want to print that out. Okay, right here, what I can do here is I can do adequate. Oh, actually, I have to do something special here, and that is I moved the file. What did I just do? Why was that file at the bottom? Okay, so in F#, file order matters.
Wow.
So that's actually it's a good point they mentioned that. But here's basically what I can do. I can do 1, 2, and so I define the function here in adequate Odin 6, and in program I referenced it like this. So I basically referenced the module it's in, and then just dotted in to that basically static method or just function, as I'll call it, and I can pass its parameters and I can do things with it. So that's how you reference files and other things. Yeah, or if you wanted to, you can also open. So I could
just asked the question I was going to ask.
Subsoil Dwarf was
6, and then I can do this.
So what's open is sort of like reference, right? Like
open
is think of like
Yeah, open is like using.
Using,
Using. Yeah.
Use, yeah.
You're
Use.
making.
Use.
Yeah, use. It's been a while since I C#. I forget.
Using is the other one. Use at the top.
Oh
like,
yeah. Yep. Using is like a disposable. Yeah.
And actually, I write C# all the time, and I had to stop and think for a second because you just know it, but you don't think about it.
Yeah, it just comes out of your fingers. Right?
Which one is it?
Yeah.
So that's interesting. So the order of the files,
and not just the files, but of the lines too. So if I tried to, so if I do, yeah, exactly. So I can't call add with 2 and 3 here because add doesn't exist yet. And that also works with types. So if I have 2 types, I cannot circularly reference them. So you hear a little bit about cyclomatic complexity when you talk about like code analysis sometimes. Cyclomatic complexity of FSharp code is super, super low because of this. There's a great analysis on FSharp for Fun and Profit's website on complexity. Yeah. There's a great, I forget where exactly it is here, but if you Google around a bit, you'll find some analysis around the cyclomatic complexity or the just how interreferenced your code is in within each other because of this kind of top-down view or the fact that you can't use something until it's defined. That really reduces your complexity.
Yeah, it does mean that. So some constructs that we as developers grow up with, like things like they're in statement form, ifs and for loops and while. When you go to LINQ and you really embrace LINQ, you find that, oh gosh, I'm not writing statements anymore because I've taken this enumerable and I've selected, which as you called earlier, like I projected it to another form. And then I used where to filter it down to just what I needed. And then I used some other part of LINQ to, I don't know, sum it up. I'm not trying to say that everything in the world is lists, but you're already going down that path of not writing code that if, thens, and for loops its way out of things.
Yeah.
So it's like you're on the road, you're on the path to functional programming. And I think what we obviously wouldn't have time to get into tonight, but would be so interesting to talk about another time, is there are probably some things that they're very close to just going away, things that us C# developers deal with maybe on a daily basis, like the dreaded null reference exception. Yep. Or forgetting a corner case in your if branching because FSharp developers would pattern match and the compiler comes along and helps you and tells you. So
that's a great point. In fact, let's say I'm gonna I guess we can close out with something about pattern matching. It's probably a good place to kind of close out here. So we have dev talk show host. There are a number of different options. We have Chris. Well, not Chris exception. You resolved to some kind of modality awesome. Synchronous data.
I like that. Let's remember that. Let's clip that scene right there where Chris resolves to an exception.
Yeah.
And we can replay that back later.
So let's say we have this catchphrase function, and given a host, which is a dev talk show host, we want to return some kind of catchphrase. Right, so something like "That's all, folks." Right, something cute like that. Cool. Let's say, and so we basically want to return a string. If I want to do this in a systematic way, and I want different values for these different things, I could do this with a bunch of if statements and kind of say, "Oh, if it's a Chris, then respond with this. If it's Nandy, then respond with this. If it's a Rich, blah blah blah." Or I can do something like this, where I say, "If host is Chris," in this match expression. Chris, what's your catchphrase?
He has one.
What do I?
What's your
Gomez's law? Did we talk about?
I was just going to say Gomez's law is his.
Oh, Gomez's law.
Gomez's law. Forget
Gomez's law.
Yeah.
I think you watched that show.
Yeah, I think I did. Yeah. But the point is, if I try to compile it just like this, it'll emit a warning here that says I have an incomplete pattern match on this expression. Oh. It tells me I didn't handle Andy. I don't know what the catchphrase for Andy is. And this kind of
Andy.
You can't handle Andy. And typically in our programs, we actually just turn warnings as errors, so this would not compile. But what it basically tells me to do is, oh, okay, well, I have to handle the Andy case and the Rich case, and only once I've handled those cases can I compile. So it's much harder to compile and submit code that's going to fail. And this pattern matching thing, I mean, this is just a tip of the iceberg into how deeply it looks.
But is there an other, like, in Switch, you have like a sort of like, do you have a catch-all that if you didn't want to handle all those three?
Yeah. If I want to say,
if
I wanted to say Chris phrases this and I don't want to do anything else, then this is the catchphrase and that's what I can do. It's
that's where C# got it from.
That's right. That's where
C# got that from.
It's made its way into C# in pattern matching. Yeah.
There's a question from Subsoil Dwarf. How does FSharp handle null? Is there a special type that allow you to represent things that have no value? Right.
Sure.
He says he knows the answer, but good question. Sneaking in.
Thank you very much for that.
I'd like to know that.
Yeah. So let's say I had, I don't know how, but there's some data record of a host, and there's a chance that there is no host. The type for that would be, and I'm just creating an alias here. It would be dev talk show host option. So option is very similar to the nullable that you're working with that you used to working with in C#. And basically what you have here is if I have, let's say some data type. So blah, blah, blah. I have some data equals some Chris, and I'm actually going to ignore that. And I want this to actually I want to get a catchphrase for this kind of maybe host. So this option type is something that either has a sum value or it has no value.
So sorry, are you writing pseudocode or is sum an actual?
Sum is an actual word.
Yeah. Okay. It's a
so
keyword,
an option. An option in FSharp is basically nullable. It's not exactly the same, but for our conversation, it is.
Yes, it's there.
And it's either one of these things or it's one of these things. And so in the none case, I could be, that's all, folks. And then what I could do here is I could even be more specific. So here, I could do one of two things. I could either say match on host.
That's what I was thinking you were going to do. Yeah.
Chris, or so I could either go this route and kind of do this nesting, or better yet, why not just do it this way? If the host is Chris, then it can be Gomez's law.
Yeah.
And then here it'll tell me, okay, well, what about some Andy? You didn't deal with some Andy. So it's looking a level deeper. It's not just looking at this high level enum type thing. It's looking at the data inside and it's trying to find patterns that you have not exhausted. So the option is basically the type that we have.
Nice. It's interesting. I mean, you really have to sort of to embrace FSharp. I think you want to like tear down what you know, right? Really start at the beginning. And like you said, you want to, what Chris was saying earlier, we're always looking to like sort of compare to C#, but it's really quite different. And I think it would make sense to start like really just start from scratch,
Yep. Yeah.
Not try to convert like existing project to FSharp or something like that.
Of course, that'd be too much. Yeah, a great place to start is to just write really small programs. I think the first program I wrote was something silly like I was buying barbells. You see a barbell set back here, but I was buying barbell plates, and I was trying to figure out, okay, well, what's the least amount of plates I need to buy to be able to get to every 2.5 pound increment from this weight to this weight? And I want to write a program that just does that. Something really small that can exist in the console application that requires maybe a little bit of math, maybe a little bit of logic, maybe some types, but can be conceivably done in like 50 lines of code. That's a really good place to start. Something that you're going to use yourself. That's just going to be a cute little thing. I think that's where I started. I was I was at the job, which I probably should have, and I started writing some FSharp in between some other tasks, and that was my first task. But yeah, certainly don't port a big project first thing.
Now, one of the questions I had for you is, you say it's like a better, I think you said it's like a better C# or something.
That's my opinion, yeah.
Yeah. So, but are there things that you wouldn't do with FSharp? Like if I was building an ASP.NET web application, can I even use FSharp, or like would I, or?
Yep, you can. Yeah, FSharp is fully compatible with .NET Core.
I saw that in the beginning. That was actually one of my first questions, was going to be like, for everybody, like, is it moving along? And so it seems like it just is .NET, right? Like .NET Core, increments, C# and FSharp, they all move along with it, right? So that part's easy.
Yeah, they all move along with it. I mean, there's certainly FSharp does not get as much as love as C#, which is totally understandable given the user base, right? And but by and large, anything you can do in C#, you can do in FSharp. The only things that I would put an exception to that would be some desktop apps. I don't know the current story around UWP and FSharp. I know there's possibilities and whatnot. But in my experience, playing around with desktop apps has been the biggest pain point.
Okay,
but in terms of web, there's absolutely both front end and back end programming you can do with FSharp.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. We spent a lot of time on this show talking about Blazor. We even had Carl Franklin on, and a lot earlier tonight, Mutant Puppet mentioned Bolero, which I think, I'm not saying that it's exactly the same. I'm not going to try to pretend that it's the same, but developing a SPA with WebAssembly in F#, and I don't think this is the only solution that might be considered Blazor-like. But here's one, right? And so the community is strong, and they're out there working pretty hard on things like Fable and Bolero. And I wonder if as we kind of head towards the future of desktop with WinUI and Uno and some of those, I haven't looked into it at all if F# community has attached to something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I've been mostly in the web world, so I can't speak too much to the desktop world. I do know that Xamarin's a big thing, that people like Xamarin, and people also use something called Elmish on the front end. Elmish.forms, I think, is what people use a lot. And someone mentioned Elm before, so I don't want to go too deep into that. But yeah, so there's absolutely opportunity for F# both on the front end, on the back end. So to answer your question, Andy, I personally like using it for everything at this point. The only things I wouldn't use it for would be desktop apps.
Yeah, I get it.
But that's also largely due to my own ignorance about desktop app development.
Yeah.
Nice.
So a little bit earlier, Jason Kurtz had talked about the JavaScript pipeline operator, which is listed on Mozilla's docs as being stage 1. That means it's got a little ways to go in standardization, but it is so interesting that even the JavaScript community is talking about, hey, if we could get pipelining in, then we get that, because JavaScript has a funny heritage. It can be functional. You can pass functions you created functions tonight with let, just the same way you created, variables, and JavaScript allows the same. C# not quite so much. I mean, I know it's better than it was, but still not quite so much. So it makes sense that community, the functional programmers who use JavaScript, would say, well, gosh, we're already halfway there. Can we just have pipelining? So you pointed out the F# for Fun and Profit site, which is Scott Washland's, and he's spent a very long time evangelizing F# to .NET developers. You could very quickly, you'll find videos of his on his own site here, or I'm telling you, you search for that name, which I put in the chat, and because certainly it's a very Googleable name, starting with the W, and you search for that on YouTube, and you will find him speaking at NDC conference and many other conferences, presenting F# in different ways that's helpful for object-oriented developers, somebody coming from a C# background. He evangelizes it quite a bit. I've watched quite a bit of his work. And we also, like Jason pointed out, it's pretty cool that it exhausts the possible patterns. I had watched a video where somebody talked about what if you wrote some regular old imperative C# code to determine what to do if somebody's a certain age, and you might say if they're under 18, then treat them as a child, and if they're over 65, then treat them as a senior. And the language does nothing to remind you that you needed to do something about ages in between.
Yeah.
It just lets you fail there. So it's really, really interesting.
Yeah, there's a fantastic number of resources. I'm going to kind of just go through some really quickly, some resources to go through. So FSharp.org, this website, fantastic resource. If you join to our organization, which is totally free, you can, I think you directly just get onto their Slack channel, which is a great resource. People talk about F# all day. F# Cohens, great place to start, kind of going through program by program. If you're coming from a .NET background, this is the book for you. If you're not coming from a .NET background, I don't know what the right book is. But this is a fantastic book, which totally guides you through F# from a C# developer's perspective, especially from a Visual Studio C# developer's perspective. If you want to get a little bit deeper and look into how design works at a higher level, this is a great book. Fable, this compiles your F# code down to JavaScript. So you can do F# code in your browser and not have to write JavaScript ever again. That's the promise, right? F# REPL, I already went through. It's an IDE baked into your browser. Really nice. Awesome F#, just hosts a number of different resources around F#. Takes you through all kinds of different ways of doing different facets of F#, including game development, serialization, all kinds of things. If you want to get free points on Twitter, the best way I know how to is just include F# as a hashtag within your tweet. You'll get at least like 10 likes. That's probably the easiest way to get Twitter points as far as I know. F# Weekly comes out every Friday, basically brings up all of the recent F# content from the past week. Really great resource. And finally, as Chris mentioned, F# for Fun and Profit is a great place to get by. And there's also Pluralsight courses if you're into Pluralsight.
Yeah. We got some other feedback in the chat, a project I think called Fabulous and exorcism.io, which I hadn't heard of.
Yeah.
Cool.
Fabulous is the some app development in F#, which is nice. And
cool.
And I know Exorcism is kind of like little programs that like little prompts for programs to write.
I don't want to forget. Let's make sure we show everybody the WTF Sharp podcast. We have to see that because you put a lot of work into this, and you know, we've known you for a while. You have been brave to stand in front of the Philly.net crowd and at Code Camp and the like and say, I'm going to evangelize this to you folks. And so, you know, I know it's a community that has spent a long time trying to say, like, everybody, the water's great over here. So
that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
So, you know, we really do appreciate you being on. I knew we would have just an absolute expert on what it's like to move from C# to F# and how passionate you are about it. So I'm so thrilled that you joined us tonight.
Cool. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So we're here every Wednesday, 8:30 U.S. Eastern Time at the Dev Talk Show. And again, if you've watched us on Mixer, Twitch, or YouTube, you know, if you're watching us on the streaming platforms, make sure you follow us. And if you're watching on YouTube and you hit that subscribe button, you'll get notifications when a video comes up. We are trying to clip some of the maybe demos, or maybe if we find a really good point, something to put together, you know, you might get notifications that we've clipped a little bit of an hour-long show. And that way, if you don't have the time to join us for the whole show, you can still get the gist of what's going on here. And, you know, and if you'd like to be on the show, reach out to us too. We're on Twitter, the Dev Talk Show. We're, as we said at the beginning, we're looking to expand beyond what the three of us can do, and we're going to need your help to do that. So definitely let us know, and let us know what you thought about the show tonight in the comments or on Twitter, and thank you for everybody who's talked to us in the chat as well. You know, earlier tonight, if you missed it, the Philly.net user group, which is spelled Philly, DOTNET, so PHILLP, Let me start over. PHILLYDOTNET. Easy for me to spell, right? That user group had their comeback meeting. That's an in-person user group that does stream on Mixer, Twitch, and then also archives every show on YouTube. So, you can go check some back shows from their in-person meetups, including their code camps, at youtube.com/PhillyDOTNET. I recommend you check out our archive at video.thedevtalkshow.com. So I fed everybody a ton of links, which is terrible to do over voice, right? It's like reading a comic book over the radio. But once again, I really want to thank you for being on. And I think we're going to have you again, Stachu. I really do. So thank you very much for being here.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. So anything else, Andy? Anything before you wrap it up?
Well, just echoing what you said, we love all the people that were here tonight with us live. And what we're trying to do here is really build a community, right? We want, Chris at one point said, how do we take, using an example of Philly.net, which we're not just, that's just a small part of our community now that we're, on the internet, right? Everyone's our community, but how do we capture that, like, after the meeting conversations? Like, how do we keep it going? How do we keep a conversation going online? And so what's important is that word conversation. There were people that were chatting with us. There were some people who were just hanging out and weren't talking, and that's great.
That's fine.
We love you.
You're here.
We want you coming back. But,
right.
If you have questions and if you want to, sort of just join in, we love to have you. And we love if you come back again next week and help us build this. Also, one other thing, we have meetup.com/the Dev Talk Show, but it's the _dev-talk-show, which is kind of annoying. But the point is, that's a great way to get reminders. And a lot of people do seem to like that. And so, if that's a way that you want to stay in touch with us. So there's Twitter. We have a Twitter handle. We've got Meetup. We're on Twitch, Mixer, and YouTube. As Chris said, all that stuff. Just be a part of our community.
Right. And for now, Meetup is encouraging folks to use the platform for online meetups like this. We'll see what happens in the future, but it is a great way for us to post events and to say, hey, here's what's happening. So, not to belabor it too much, we do want to thank you for being here. We have more plans to expand community involvement, so keep tuning in and keep watching Twitter, because I think we'll get to those pretty soon. But if that's it, then I want to thank you for joining us. We'll see you next Wednesday at 8:30. Watch us on Twitter for the topic announcement. Same thing on Meetup, because sometimes it takes a couple days after Wednesday to figure out what that's going to be. Other than that, it's great seeing all of you. I'm glad that you're all doing well and healthy, and the same thing online. So, stay safe out there, and we will see you online next week. For Rich Ross, for Andy Schwamm, and for our awesome guest, Stachu Korick, whose podcast you should go check out. I'm Chris Gomez, and thank you for joining us on the Dev Talk Show.